welcome everyone to this episode of Chasing the Vision. I am very excited to be recording, I think, the 11th episode of the year. We're getting close to it. Maybe episode 10, maybe episode 11. Not really sure. We lost track somewhere along the way, which is not great, but we did. So I'm excited to be here with Tim Hull and JT Kraai, who you are used to being on the show. And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Josh Bachman, who is a advisor with Violand Management Associates as well. And today we are talking about the topic of outsourcing as a strategic tool for scaling, efficiency, profitability, and doing those things without overwhelming your resources. Every company kind of gets to this point of needing help in certain areas, but maybe you can't afford that directly on the payroll yet and all the benefits and everything that might come along with it. And kind of as technology grows and as the industry expands, there's a lot of opportunity in this area to lean into outsourcing some of the things that happen in your restoration company day to day. So that's what we are talking about today. Since you know Tim and JT, I'm going to toss it to Josh to introduce himself a little bit and share a little bit of background.
All right, cool. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so like you said, I work with Tim over at Violand. I'm going very quickly here on 5 years with Violand, which is hard to believe. But I come from a long background in the restoration business, both in Texas and now up here in the frozen cold tundra north of Chicagoland, where I now make my home. And had a chance in my career to do a little bit of everything within the restoration field, from being out on the front end, stuck in the water at 3 o'clock at night, to being on the back end of taking phone calls and running operations. So I feel like I've had a chance to kind of put on all the hats in the time that I've been around the industry.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us today. So, all right, Tim or JT, which one of you wants to set the scene? Maybe Tim, because we were talking about what to do for our next episode. So, where did outsourcing come about in this kind of chasing the vision conversation?
So it actually came up recently in a discussion I had with a previous client who ended up selling his business, JT. We were kind of reflecting a little bit about our time together, and we got to work together for the better part of about 11 years, which was pretty cool. And I got to see them through a bunch of stages of growth. We were just thinking about what are some of the things that we talked about, we worked on that really kind of led to the success of eventually selling the business. And this individual, came out and he said, there was one thing that you said at this program that you did in the executive summit, and we were talking about building businesses and operational modeling and different organizational charts, what they look like, and all that stuff. And he goes, you use this phrase called duct tape. Because if you guys remember way back in the day, and when we did the summit, I did this program called building a high performance organization. And I compared and contrasted building a business to running a NASCAR team.
Hmm.
And we went through all the different models associated with stages of growth of an organization. And I said, and you don't just go from one stage to the other. It's not that clean. You don't just add 3 people or add 4 people, right? Or create these positions as soon as you turn, the next millions of dollars. So you have to use what's the only approved repair device in NASCAR, which is duct tape. And what I was referring to is figuring out ways that you can shift around capacity in your organization. And outsourcing was one of those methods. So you can't just automatically dump another million, half million, $2 million on somebody's plate, or create another week worth of time for somebody to do things in. You have to fill in that capacity with other resources. And outsourcing is in my opinion, one of the more strategic things that you can do, whether it's temporary or permanent, to meet the demands of that increased capacity, demand, or workload as you continue to grow business. So you asked for it, Michelle. There's the background.
Perfect background. Okay, JT, anything you want to add or anything you want to add to the kind of setup of this conversation from the seat that you sit in?
Yeah, it was fascinating. I sat through Josh's workshop last year at one of the planning summits. I don't even remember which one, but it was fantastic. And from my seat, it's a little different. We've all watched the industry sort of morph the last 8 or 10 years, and especially now with this current downward pressure on margins, everybody's looking, for ways to bring an extra few percentage points to the bottom line without additional overhead. And outsourcing, I think, is a great. It's not only a great concept, I think it's great strategically to be able to do that. So I'm anxious to learn more today from Josh as well. But to me, the first challenge is just getting data for these business owners. They've just got to get data quicker. And I think there's a lot of outsourcing techniques that can do that. And then when it comes to various forms of labor, you can also outsource a lot of that. So hopefully that comes up in today's conversation, and I can contribute where applicable. But I'm anxious to hear more about what Josh has to say.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So, Josh, let's lay the groundwork here. Is there a point in a company that you work with where you see, okay, this is the time when it's time to start stepping into outsourcing? And are there some typical places to start with outsourcing, or is it kind of different for everybody?
I don't know, Michelle, that I have a real good like handle on, hey, here's the marker that says exactly when that's going to take place. I tend to look at it when I see, you know, steam coming out of the head of the owner, or Tim, I, and JT seem to go to a similar barber, so maybe it's a loss of hair or whatever that is. When I start to see those kind of signs of the staff getting overwhelmed, whether it's the owner or the leaders of the organization, then is when it's time to start looking at some other resources that could come into play, to try to get that done. And so I don't know. Like I said, there's a perfect marker, but it's you can kind of see it written on people's faces. I think when you see that there's an opportunity for those things. The easiest ones to jump into, Michelle, in my opinion, are just because it's out there and it's kind of been tried and true, is from an estimating standpoint, that's probably the one that I think is the easiest to kind of step into, maybe even try before you buy, because you could hey, let's just go get one of these done and see how it works, rather than signing a long-term contract and saying, okay, we're going to do this as our solution moving forward. So that's an easy kind of like stepping stone to get into the thought process of doing it not within your own house and having somebody else do it. I think JT mentioned labor. I think that's another easy place for us to jump in and say, hey, is there a way for somebody who doesn't wear my shirt to come alongside us? And that's a typical thing that we can step into pretty quickly. And that sounds like subcontracting, but it really is outsourcing, right?
Mhm.
And so it's the same kind of thing. And I think that's an easy one for our, one of those two angles is probably my first kind of play into this foray, or that I would jump into. Yeah,
Awesome. There are so many estimating resources out there. That is a great
absolutely.
point to
Mhm.
dip into that, and a lot will let you try it for free or discount for the first one or
For
whatever
sure.
that may be.
For
So you can,
sure.
yeah, test the waters before jumping in. Tim or JT, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I like the idea that Josh threw out there about kind of testing the idea, teasing it out a
Mhm.
little bit. And I think you could do that with any department, really, whether it was back office stuff or operationally in the field. But I would second that suggestion, try before you commit to something,
Mhm.
and see how it goes. Test it out in small batches first.
Mhm.
So, what do you tell an owner? This is kind of putting your psychologist hat on a little bit or therapist hat on a little bit, going, but I don't want to. I like having control of our estimates. I like knowing exactly what's happening. I don't want to let go of this. How do you help an owner let go and start outsourcing when it's time?
Michelle, usually I think that comes with me answering an email from them at 11 o'clock at night. And I think that's kind of how I start, is I can actually just respond right back into that of, how did you enjoy sending that email at 11 o'clock after you made dinner, put your kids to bed, went back into your office and started putting that thing back together. I think that's really what I can combat that piece with, is just kind of stepping into, hey, how much longer can you sustain at this level? How much longer do you want to sustain at this level? And here you are on one side telling me you want to grow, and your actions then aren't backing that up. How can we have a conversation around what that looks like? And so maybe we try a little bit of this, maybe we try a little bit of that, as a way to take some of that load off you or your team. And whether I'm happy to be talking to the owner, or, like I said before, talking to one of the leaders in the company, it really doesn't matter. It's just when I start to see kind of the train go off the rails a little bit, that I think when you start to see that pressure, it gives me a voice to step into that gap and say, hey guys, maybe we think about this a little bit differently. Maybe we approach it here, and maybe we look at bringing in some other resource here. And I like going back to what Tim said right at the top of this, Michelle. It doesn't have to be forever, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be like you're going to do this and you're going to sign this part away and you're never going to bring it back in house, right? How many of us have in-house marketing people, right? As restorers, most of us don't.
Yep.
When you hit a certain threshold, maybe it makes sense to bring that back in, but let's outsource it for the next year and
Mhm.
then take an evaluation at it. So I think you can look at those kind of things from that perspective and go, hey, let's try this. again, step into it in small increments, and it doesn't have to be forever.
Are there any other misconceptions you see kind of holding owners back from outsourcing?
Absolutely. Nobody can do it as good as me. I think that's the biggest one, right? Is that we run into, especially, I mean, we just talked about and joked about estimating being an easy way to jump into it.
Yeah.
But all too often, I talk to an owner who says, well, nobody can estimate like me. You don't understand Chicago. And I'm like, cool, really? I might.
You might.
And so you want to have a conversation around that? Or, you don't understand what it's like to work in Northern California. And I'm like, I might, let's have a conversation around that, and we might be able to find somebody who does that. So I think there comes in that fact that's probably the biggest one is that nobody can do it as well as I possibly can, and so there's a fear factor there involved with allowing that piece to go away a little bit and allowing somebody else to step into that role.
Yep.
The only thing I kept thinking, JT, was how do you think that comment would sit with a potential buyer of the business?
Not very well. Yeah, it's so interesting, Josh. I was nodding as you were talking because my first 10 years in the industry, I don't think I had a client less than 55 years old, a seller that was actually ready to sell.
Sure.
Now, 50% of my sellers are less than 55, and
Mhm.
some of them in their 40s. And they'll say, I started this, 8 or 10 years ago. It's not what I thought. It's changed so much. This isn't what I bargained for. And they are the ones sending those emails at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And they don't know how to be strategic, which is interesting.
Yep.
So, JT, in sticking with you here then a little bit, how can outsourcing be a good way to start enhancing your value if you are thinking about selling or kind of looking at your exit strategy, even if it's further down the road than, 6 or 12 months, even if it's further down the road, how can this help?
Oh, great question. And it's a loaded one, right? I mean, I think we've all touched on it that
Yeah.
the outsourcing should bring additional percentage points to the bottom line. You hear people over the years that'll say, I had to stair step. This year I had to put another, $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000 into my business. And then we got to the level we wanted to. And I think outsourcing allows those steps to be much shorter without incurring all the overhead. And so I think that's the fantastic part of outsourcing. And what scares me a little bit is there's really good ways to outsource, and those can be with softwares and apps and it doesn't all have to be inexpensive labor from India and the Philippines. I think that's one of those big misconceptions. There's a lot of ways to outsource. And also what's troubling for my seat, or what I think is potentially going to be troubling, is when we start outsourcing people and key positions, which is a trend now that's happening, is who's going to own those relationships? We've got contracted CFOs, which is, one level. We've got contracted accounting, which is pretty safe. We've got contracted sales managers and CEOs. And well, when that relationship ends, who owns the relationships in the business? Is it the contracted parties or is it the business still? And I think we're on a slippery slope there that I think time is going to help vet, and we may have to jump over some hurdles and hit some bumps in the road to really understand the value of those relationships and what happens if they get outsourced. And I don't have any insight on that yet. It's early, but I'm anxious to see how it evolves the next couple of years.
That was a perfect segue because something I was going to ask Josh next is kind of weighing the options between, okay, I could outsource or I could hire somebody. And we already talked about the cost savings, but there might be other reasons there. So, Josh, how do you balance out like, weighing the pros and cons of both sides to decide which route might be the best?
Yeah, and Michelle, I think I'll take the angle that JT kind of set up there first to kind of talk about it from that perspective is that I think it's very careful when we look at outsource. We have to be very careful when we outsource to not just be set and forget,
Yeah.
right? Just like we would manage an in-house staff, we have to manage that outsourced resource the same way. If I mean, guys, that I work for Tim. Tim and I meet on a regular basis and
Mm-hmm.
we talk about what's going on in the business and he sets expectations for me. I share those things. We have a conversation on a regular rhythm. I think that same kind of thing has to be replicated as you look at an
Mm-hmm.
outsourced resource. And if you don't, then you have the fear of going exactly what JT is talking about, where you don't necessarily own that whole business part of your business anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You allow that to be in someplace else. So you have to be, I think you have to be really, really careful around how you set that up and kind of the lack of better terms, the guardrails that you would give that relationship so that it is still an owned thing by the company that you're working for, but you're letting some of the heavy lifting be done outside of the office. And so, I think it's just really important that you play into that a little bit and allow that relationship to kind of take hold organically the same way that it would somebody inside your office. When you're comparing whether you're going to look at that, and obviously, Michelle, like you said, when you look at bringing somebody on, the cost savings is the biggest thing, but it's really hard to define. It's hard to put a dollar amount on my time, right?
Mm.
Because I'm not necessarily billable, and so when I'm making those conversations around when it's time to hire somebody outsourcing, look at the cost that they represent versus the cost that I represent, it's hard to get those things on the same, line of the equation so that I can make a decision around what's best. And so I think it takes us as owners and as leaders some time to, I don't know, analyze what we're actually bringing to the table and
Mhm.
what value that represents, and probably have to build in some of that opportunity cost a little bit there of what else I could be doing as an owner, than writing an estimate at 11 o'clock at night. Back to my example from earlier, right? And so I think that's kind of how we start to kind of balance that piece a little bit.
That makes good
So
sense.
Michelle, I have a question for Tim and Josh, and Josh, maybe just for you. To me, on how and why your outsourcing probably determines or is determined by the need. Maybe there's a short-term need. You lost a key estimator. You don't have time to go get one, and you're going to outsource that for a period of time until you can hire and train. Maybe you've picked up some new clients, some new referral sources, and you need several more estimators for a year or two or three until your capacity catches up. And maybe you just decide to outsource estimating completely. So, forever. So there's two or three separate options there. How does this scenario and your need drive the type of outsourcing? To me, there's a connection there, and I don't know quite what it is.
Yeah, JT, I think it is like you said earlier on the question Michelle asked you, that's a loaded question and a little bit nuanced on
Mm-hmm.
how you would respond to that based on what's going on in your company at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at it from the perspective, and since we're staying on estimating, it's like I said, nice stepping stone, nice easy way for us to concretely talk about what's going on there. I look at it from the perspective of, in that particular case, JT, I look at an estimate as a commodity, right? I look at that as something that I can go get from a lot of different resources and bring into my company. Is
Mm-hmm.
the estimate that you write, Michelle writes, I write, and Tim write, is that going to all be 100% the same? I think with some training, we could get those things very, very, very close, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
then is kind of the definition of commodity, right? So we could basically play that out a little bit. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to go get that same piece of what we need from the company. Now it's just asking the question of what makes sense for you guys financially, and are you happy with the way that delivery piece is coming in?
Okay.
And so I think that's the way that I would approach it, is looking at it from,
Mm-hmm.
hey, okay, now I can go grab that. I hate to say that estimating is something I can go grab off the shelf, but it's something I can go grab off the shelf pretty easily and bring
Mm-hmm.
into my company, and have that be a resource that's available to me. If I was looking at something else, like you said, outsourced bookkeeping or outsourced CFO, I think that opens up a whole nother dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
that we have to discuss, because I don't look at that quite the same way as a commoditized resource
Mm-hmm.
that I would as an estimate. And so I think that's part of what plays into the difference there. As I look at that piece is how regular and how effective that piece is that I can get from my outsourced people. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so do any of you have specific examples of outsourcing that has brought immediate ROI? We're going to get into in a minute more because we've talked about estimating a lot, but there's a lot more ways that you can outsource. So we're going to get into that. So people who are listening, hang in there. But any specific examples of how outsourcing can produce immediate ROI?
Yeah, I'll go. And I'll kind of
Yeah.
tie this into the previous conversation that they were talking about. So, JT, you bring up a good point. A lot of times the desired outcome has a lot to do with what you put into it. And Michelle, I think a few months ago, I read an article on the difference between outsourcing, contracting, and
Mhm.
fractional
Yep.
service providers.
Yep.
And I think that's important to delineate in this conversation because
Mm-hmm.
while sales management and chief financial management offerings like those fractional service providers are out there. Those people are who are generally integrated into your organization, right? Um, Contracting when you buy something out like a painter or roofer or whatever, they're there. They're usually project oriented, so they have a deliverable to produce for you. When we're talking about outsourcing, you're usually looking to for somebody to provide a service with inside your organization, and it could be customer facing and it could be back office oriented in that regard. So, to me, one of the biggest considerations is really opportunity cost.
Mhm.
So when I have to make like a nickel to nickel decision here, I might be getting paid for that, or it might be an internal expense to me because it's something that needs to be done on a project basis in my organization. Um, but the big question I've got is if I've got somebody inside the organization, or I'm going to hire somebody to do it inside my organization, what else could I have them doing, not working on that particular service or project?
Mhm.
So to your point, what is a good example of something that is effective? Josh just had one earlier. Marketing. Yes, you can figure out how to optimize your search engine position. You can figure out how to work the social media channels. You can figure out, the digital print media side of the equation, all that. But is it what you do every day? Where is your value to the organization? If you're the owner, you're probably better off going out and selling something or recruiting more talent to your organization, or doing high level client facing activities rather than trying to figure out how you can get from 4 to number 1 in the Google search rankings. you know
Especially with how often Google changes. Like, goodness gracious, leave it to the
oh
experts.
yeah,
Oh, no, thank you.
yeah, I mean,
Estimating can be the same. So,
the worst thing I hear, and Josh, I mean, he's going to cringe. His hair, what's left, will stand back up
Mhm.
on his neck when you hear, I hired this salesperson. Oh, and they're also going to take over our social media marketing activities. You're like, no, no, sales, marketing, two different things. But yeah, you got to pick your battles there.
we could do a whole podcast on sales and marketing, but we digress.
Let's
Okay.
invite Jeff Jones.
Yes. Maybe we'll have to bring him in as a guest at some point. Okay, so all right, let's talk about the different areas that you can outsource because we have talked about estimating a lot. So what else is there, Josh?
Yeah, I think Tim also kicked off. We'll marker off the digital marketing and move on from that, or the marketing side at all. I think that's an
Yes.
easy one to kind of look at. I look at some other things that I'm seeing pop into our industry right now is not just the estimating piece, but we're also now outsourcing the settlement, which
Mhm.
is an interesting conversation. So we're handing that off to people to do that. That's a place where I'm still exploring and feeling how that goes, because that now I'm asking somebody to negotiate on my behalf, and where do those limits kind of set in? But I go back, it's attractive to me at least to have those conversations, because it goes right back to the opportunity cost of what Tim talked about. If I'm spending, 5 hours of my week negotiating with adjusters, wow. Maybe it's worth a few percentage points to have somebody else do that for me. So that's one that I'm seeing coming along. I think one we haven't touched on, but isn't kind of an older one, is recruiting, and bringing on staff. There's reason that we would look at that, please, and that goes back to what Tim talked about that's not what you do every day. Wouldn't it be nice to have somebody present me the top three candidates? Then I can take the next step on, instead of going through the 300 that I get when I put something out on Indeed, right? And so, let's have a conversation around that. So I think that's a nice way, that's something easy that we can look at, and hey, you just kind of weed through these. Here's some requirements, and hand that piece off. So I think that's a nice place that we start to see some of that kind of thing go on. I've seen some outsourced purchasing recently, which is interesting. So, hey, I need this much carpet per year, and I could go to a resource that's going to help me kind of source these kind of things, and see how that plays out. And then, I think, Michelle, this is, Tim mentioned three different kinds of outsourcing when you talked about, fractional CFOs and those kind of things, and
Mhm.
bringing it back down. But, we would be remiss on a call here at the end of 2025 if we didn't say something about AI, right? And that is outsourcing, right?
Yep.
That is going to another resource and allowing it to do that. Again, I have my concerns there, and that's, like you said, probably a whole nother podcast, but But still, there is a resource there that we can go to and allow that to be, if nothing else, a verbal sparring partner to how we're going through our conversations.
Verbal sparring partner. I like it. Okay. All right.
Well, it's easier to yell at that than to yell at Tim, Michelle. So yeah, I can just
It
yeah,
is. And gosh,
Appreciate
sometimes
that.
AI is frustrating. I found myself like, why are you you're hallucinating. Stop hallucinating. Yes. Um, okay, so are there areas that you see contractors like overextending their staff, kind of key markers of you're overworking maybe an admin because they're doing marketing or your social media too? Common areas where you're seeing staff, actual people on payroll getting overextended, and that's a good place to start with outsourcing.
Yeah, don't we always let our HR folks, I mean, our accounting folks do the HR? Isn't that like
Yes.
commonality? Is like that's part of something that's built in. Listen, you're an accountant, so you must be good at HR. And so that's nothing as touchy-feely as a numbers guy playing with
Yeah.
feel. Yeah, like it's great. But I think that's an easy one, Michelle, because you look at somebody, why can't I get reporting to close my month? Oh, because you're going through resumes? Wow, cool. Let's have a conversation there. Let's pause for a second and really see it. So that for me is an easy one to look at and say, hey, there's someplace where I'm overloading staff. We tend to also look at it, and I don't want to keep retreading on the estimating side, so I'll stay away from it. But it's right there next to it. Is that I look at project management staff, whether it's on the mitigation side or whether it's on the repair side. Often we ask those folks to be jack of all trades and do just a little bit of everything from the start of a process to the end of the process. Are there places within that process that I could add other resources and not have that person so overloaded? And that goes kind of back to my 11 p.m. emails, right? When I start to see those things pop in from those folks, or I start to see them, burn out and frazzle a little bit, then it's time to look at, hey, what could I insert into that process someplace, whether it's estimate or something else? What could I insert into that process to kind of take that load off?
Yeah. Okay, Tim, JT, anything you want to add on that one? Anywhere you see staff commonly overextended? JT, I bet you see that sometimes. Areas in a company that is looking to be valued and is like, "Whoa, you've really overdone it on your X."
I do. Yeah, I do. It's historically, I've used the term, a lot of restoration companies are slow to hire and slow to fire, and they don't want to let go because the next job is around the corner. And I think collectively the industry has been holding their breath now for 12 to 18 months, waiting for that next push.
Yep.
And they didn't cut back when they should have. And they've got people sitting around, and the warehouses are clean, the offices are spotless, the equipment's ready to go, and there's not much to do for some of these companies. But I think in one of the biggest differences that I see is in books. We all know the importance of cleanliness of books, and there's a massive experience and talent gap between a data entry bookkeeper and a controller.
Mhm.
And a lot of companies are caught in this quagmire in the middle, not really knowing where to go for good clean books in a timely fashion. Can't afford a controller, don't want to afford one. But there's some really exceptional outsourced CPA firms out there that understand restoration. And I've referred a dozen plus clients the last 18 months just to go get their books cleaned up a little bit and get an accountant in there on a fractional basis or part-time basis that understands the chart of accounts and what they're going through. And that's been a real blessing for all of us involved with a client.
That was a perfect example. All right, Tim, anything you want to add?
I mean, we could go
I
on this
know.
topic for a long time, but
I know.
but Josh, you said something that kind of triggered a thought in my mind, and it when you have anomalies that happen in your business, whether it be a surge of events or a particularly large loss, some strategies that I've seen work very effectively is to outsource the project management side
Mhm.
of one of those. So rather than tie your top producer up who's used to doing 10, 15, 20 10, 15, $20,000 jobs
Yeah.
every single week, and that you throw them on $1 million water loss or a $500,000 fire, what pick the scenario. But it's outside of what he typically does every day. Bring somebody else in to do that. So all they have to focus on is that project. Because you're going to be just stepping over dollars to, pick up change at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It feels counterintuitive, but I'm sure that, Josh, can you give some examples of how outsourcing might be able to actually improve accountability, consistency, speed of execution, those kind of things, even though it's maybe directly outside the company, but within the company you're seeing improvement?
Yeah, Michelle, I think it's easy for us to look at, and again, I'll go back to kind of my tried and true, just because most people that are listening are going to be familiar with it. But when I start to look at a company that I'm working with, and they start to tell me they got cash flow issues, the first thing I go back to is let's have a conversation about how quickly you're invoicing,
Hmm.
right? Because, yes, there's a time and a place to talk about how my collections effort is working, which is another area that can be outsourced, right? There's some people out there that say, "Hey, let me take your AR and I'll run this for you." So that's kind of cool. But I look at that piece there between when we finish the job and when getting it invoiced. That's probably when I start to really focus in on one thing with a new client of mine. It's let's do everything we can to shrink that time. And I think the things we've talked about here, whether it's project management, estimating, documentation, all those kind of pieces that we can bring somebody in to help us with, can really shrink that window. I shrink that window, I start to very quickly improve cash flow. And so that for me is a nice, clear example when somebody says, "Hey, you know what? Look at my bank account. It doesn't look like I'd like it to look." Well, that's cool, but let's go back over here and ask a little bit further why. And then once we figure a little bit of that why, that's when we can talk about bringing some other resources into that to affect those numbers, shrink those times, and eventually we start to see that show up. Not tomorrow, but we show up in your cash flow in a couple of weeks. So, and see that kind of play out. So yeah, that was easy for me.
The project manager example from a few minutes ago was also perfect on kind of freeing up people. If you bring in somebody to take out, that's helping with burnout and improving morale. And are there other ways that you see kind of this outsourcing that kind of helps everybody feel better? Everybody kind of takes a deep breath when there's something outsourced. Does that happen?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And something we just mentioned there was outsourcing that AR system, right? And having people take over your receivables and kind of do that follow-up piece. Because again, if we're talking about having somebody be a bookkeeper in my office, do they have time to do the bookkeeping data entry part plus the AP part plus the AR part? You start putting all that together and it starts becoming, back to what we were talking about earlier, Michelle, about being overloaded. If I can take off one piece of that and say, "Hey, let's let somebody kind of chase some of our customers for us a little bit and outsource that piece," well, allows that person in that role to, like you said, take a little bit of a breath and then focus on making sure that I have really, really good documentation on the front end so that I could see, I don't know, maybe see my job costs on a daily basis. That'd be great. So I can make good decisions while things are going on, allowing somebody to chase the longer term things of the AR piece. I look at it from the perspective, even if I was going to hold on to it, okay, maybe internally we hold on to it for the first 15 days of AR. Once it becomes 15 or 30 days, we turn it over to a resource and let them chase it. Right. So there's an example of where it doesn't have to be all or none. We can blend the system here a little bit and work with, what's going to work well for our companies in the instance or the position, or to Tim's point, in the time frame that we find them in. Because maybe, I don't need that for ongoing and forever and ever, but oh my gosh, it'd be great to get caught up here in these next 90 days. Cool, let's go do that.
Yeah. This whole area is also an area where, not every bookkeeper or accountant is great at collections or AR. So that could be an area like maybe they are great at the AP and payroll,
For
but
sure.
there are people that are super strong on the collections side, and not every accountant or bookkeeper necessarily is. So that's a good way to get your money by maybe leaning into somebody that is a little stronger on the collections side alone. Um, Tim or JT, anything that you want to add before we round out this kind of section and then go into risks and guardrails?
I think one of the things that kind of sticks out for me really is that there are things that need to get done in business, and sometimes they need to happen on a time frame. And if you constantly put that pressure on your staff to get things done that aren't necessarily things that you're getting paid directly from the customer for, like, internal projects, things like that, the customer facing activities, the service that you provide to your customers will always take the highest priority, which means your internal projects are always taking a back seat. When you choose to outsource those things or take it off of somebody's plate, you will almost verbally hear the sigh of relief because they don't have to worry about it any longer. So I would advocate for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to Josh and Tim's point, what Tim just mentioned is there's so many business owners that are working in an urgent fashion and not necessarily an important fashion. They try to put out all the fires because they're urgent, but they need to take a step back and say what's important. And they wear so many hats. Sometimes they just can't find the win. The what's important now. They've got to. They're too busy being urgent to get to important. So I think if they can do that, then much of this can become crystal clear, and thus enter Violand and consultants. And if you can drop some wisdom and let them step back and understand important over urgent, uh, fundamental mind shift change that affects the rest of their time as a business owner. So I think it's real important. In fact, we might even call consultants a form of outsourcing. I know they're not technically, but we're going to go get the talent somewhere. So, and I think a consultant can fill that role as well.
Mhm.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, Josh, do you see any kind of common mistakes that contractors make when they first start outsourcing?
Yeah, I think the most common one I would see, Michelle, would be, well, it's twofold, but I think it's the same issue. It's trust, right?
Mhm.
So I either do one of two things. I either don't give the outsourced resource enough leash and I try to hold on to it. So I'm like, I'm going to give you just this little piece, but I'm not going to give you the whole thing. And so I really don't get to see whether or not I get that collective, breath of fresh air, because I'm really not letting go of the process. So I think that's the one is like, we have to trust that the process is going to work. But the flip side of that same thing is that sometimes we're like, okay, I've finally done this, and we release it and we give it away, and then we just 4 weeks later, we finally look back at it and we go, why is it not working? Well, because it's been a month and you didn't look at it. So I think that's the opposite side I see is that sometimes when we finally get to that point and maybe it's just because we got overwhelmed and we're like, I have to just get rid of this and we get rid of it. But I think we need to set up, again, back to the thing I said earlier about the rhythm, about Tim and I meeting on a regular basis. It's that same kind of process with your folks that you're going to outsource. Take that AR example. I'd want to meet with that AR outsourced once a week to go over, just like I would if I had an internal staff doing
Mhm.
my AR. I'm going to have a collections meeting on a weekly basis. I think that Tim and JT would want to have that happen with any company they're working for. I'm going to want that same process set up with an outside resource. Hey, we're going to have a meeting every Tuesday at 3 o'clock to go over this. Great, good, we're on that same page. And I think that's a risk that we don't do. We're like, well, they know what they're doing. Yeah, they do, but they don't know what they're doing for your company. So let's make sure we keep that same rhythm that we would internally.
Okay, so kind of perfect segue. So, any tips for maintaining control and visibility of external partners and handling the workflow, making sure that you're doing the check-ins? I remember a time as a recruiter in this industry, and it was like pulling teeth sometimes trying to get owners to like, "Hello, we're helping you, we're sending you people, hello over here." So, maintaining visibility and some sort of control.
Yeah, I'm going to chip
Right.
in on that one and go back to Josh's point about meeting. And JT, I'm sure you experience the same thing, or you see it when you work with clients either on the buy side or the sell side. You've got to be responsive for one.
Mhm.
And I put that in a professionalism category.
Yeah.
People expect you to return their phone calls, answer their emails, or at least acknowledge them, and give them an answer whether you know or don't know what's going on. Follow through on it. Michelle, I was going to use the recruiting side as an example. We see this time and time again with clients that we work for. That recruiter hasn't gotten back to me in 3 weeks. Well, what do you mean they haven't gotten back to you? You mean you reached out to them and they didn't answer you, or they haven't presented you any candidates? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, there's your first indication. You probably should have a conversation with them. Okay. Secondly, what does the desired outcome look like? Did you want them to send every unqualified candidate across your desk? Because if you did, then you probably shouldn't be paying for their service. To Josh's point, I want to see three, four, maybe at the most top candidates. That means they're doing their job. If I don't hear from them for 3 weeks and it took 3 weeks to get three qualified candidates, then I should be pretty happy because that's a lot of hours that I could have spent doing a lot of other things.
Yes. Amen to that. Gosh,
Mhm.
recruiting is hard. So, yep. Um, okay. What does a healthy outsourced relationship look like? I know you guys have just kind of given some examples, but do either of you have any of you have an example, maybe directly from a company of like, hey, I worked with this company, they started to outsource X, and here's what happened thanks to them outsourcing X?
Yeah, I think if we look through it, Tim and I would have a bunch of examples of
Yeah.
places where where that started to come true for us. And I think, the most, again, let's kind of still go back to that guardrail section over there, Michelle, because the client the one that's coming to mind right now that I want to talk about is one where we started to see um, we were going to outsource all of our mitigation estimates. Great, that sounds like a good thing. We started to do that. And then we started to see the results, and the ROI looked very nice, and we were getting things quickly. And over the past year, what I noticed was, tell me why your average job size is going down.
Hmm.
And so that became an interesting question of, what do you mean it's going down? And I was like, well, the numbers are telling me that your average job size used to be X and now it's Y. There's a difference there. Tell me about that. And if I look at it, it just happens to be that drop in average job size happens to coincide with the relationship with your outsourced estimator. Interesting. Maybe there's a conversation to be had there. Maybe there's not, but I think we should investigate it a little bit. And what we came to find out was we were getting a lot of positives ROI from that perspective of, yes, that example was working great. And we were getting faster estimates, we were getting faster turnarounds, we were getting money in the door. So check, 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 check. The one we didn't check was, wow, my average job size was going down. When we started to push on that, what we found that what was happening was, and this turned out to be something very simple. They weren't asking our field crews for their documentation, and so we were giving away our equipment counts on every mitigation job, right? As an example, right? And so that just became because that estimator hadn't been trained to go back and say, hey, Tim, I saw that you were out there yesterday, and your notes say that we have 6 of these. I only find pictures of 4, so I'm going to charge for 4. 2 air movers gone from your estimate over 5 days of drying. No wonder my average job size and mitigation is going down. So a very, very simple example, but very, very real dollars very quickly if you're not keeping an eye on that. So what looked like a positive, checkbox, 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 over the year that we looked at it, became a negative for us. And I think I wanted to kind of pick back on that. I know the question was something else, but I thought it was important to go back to that guardrail side of, it's not just looking at it in the snapshot of, hey, what's the immediate fix, but also looking at it just like you would any other process in your business. What's the long-term run of it? What's going on here? And when we started questioning something long-term like average job size, I was like, wow, it's trending in the wrong direction. Are you watching that? So I just wanted to bring that piece back up.
JT, are there any areas that you've found where outsourcing is not a good idea or could bring down a valuation of a company? I know we've mentioned a few things, maybe related to numbers and money, but anything specific come to mind?
I don't know about specific instances because what I tend to look for is the outsourcing working or not?
Yeah.
Is it bringing additional funds to the bottom line? Is it replicatable to a buyer? Is it going to be consistent for a buyer? So I kind of look at it in a kind of a global viewpoint. I think what is troubling for me, and I'm going to touch on a point Josh made, is that I think outsourcing has to fall in the delegation bucket. Too many people treat it like I'm going to just go tell you what I need, and then to Tim's point, 3 weeks has gone by, I haven't heard anything. And in delegation, it's not just telling somebody what you need. There's got to be follow up. There's got to be the checkpoints. There's got to be some goalposts that you talk about. And when I talk with owners about their key staff, I'll ask about delegation, and they'll say, "Oh, it's fine. I told them what I needed. I told them what to do." And there's a big difference between telling somebody what to do and official, effective delegation. And I think outsourcing should be in the delegation bucket. There's got to be follow up and follow through and checkpoints, or I think it's going to be a colossal waste of time. Done right, I think it's going to be magnificent. It will continue to change the industry.
JT, to follow up on that, if you don't mind, I'll ask the question, Michelle.
Sure.
Would be, I've got a couple companies I work with that took my words to heart and started to outsource, which I appreciated. Thanks for listening to me. That's awesome. Tim will be happy. But then they took it to the next level, and suddenly I'm turned around and we've got all of them. We've got estimating, we've got fractional CFO, we've got fractional sales marketing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, does anybody work for you anymore?
Yeah.
So from a selling or buying perspective, JT, does that make a difference as you look at a company?
It does, and it comes down to the transferability of those relationships. If everybody's integrated and transferable, that's great.
Okay.
Now, the challenge comes in is when, let's say it is a CFO or it's a sales manager or a CEO or an ops manager. I'm going to repeat it again. Who owns the relationships? These guys can come on site, they do some work virtually, but they'll come on site, they'll help build that relationship, and in theory, be coaching up people behind them to replace these fractional or outsourced positions. If that's not happening, the company might not own the relationships. If those relationships are not transferable, that business isn't sellable. And that's I'm going to do a lot of homework here the next few months to find out the buyer's perspective on the transferability of some of these outsourced relationships or fractional positions, because owners might be thinking they're doing the right thing, and at the end of the day they could really be hurting themselves if they lose control of who owns what in the business.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at our notes for the next section, and we've covered a lot of it. So I'm going to go into the lightning round because I think we've talked about how this helps the owners become less, the company become less owner dependent, preparing for a sale, succession, those kind of things. We talked at the very beginning. What do you tell when you put your therapist hat on? What do you tell the owner about letting go? It's going to be okay. So anything else that any of you want to add on those topics before we go into a few lightning round questions? No?
I
Okay,
think
we're ready.
I think I'm
Okay.
good.
All right. So Josh, I'm going to start with you. What is the most undervalued area of outsourcing and restoration?
Ooh, I think undervalued right now, the one I'm looking at and still curious around is that, and I mentioned it earlier, but it's the settlement piece. I think all too often, so many of our companies are spending an enormous amount of time. If you really did a time log and kept a track of how long you're spending, we're spending so much time. And JT mentioned it right at the top of the call today about the margin pressures that we see in the industry. Well, that's coming from our adjusters, our carriers that we're working with. Is there a way that we could outsource that? I think that's tremendously undervalued when you look at the time it takes for our companies to do it inside.
Number one pain point continues to be how long it is taking for companies to get paid.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Tim or JT, you want to add anything in there? Most undervalued area? Or are you in
Yeah.
agreement?
I was going to couple that with the collection side. So I think the two go hand in hand. There's a crazy amount of time being spent on that that could be spent in doing other more productive things.
Okay.
And
What?
I'll break the mold a little bit, Michelle. I'm going to
Yeah.
go with the accounting piece. There's in my world, the numbers have to be clean. They've got to be representative of the business, and if they're not, and they don't have the capacity to fix it, we've got to go outside and get it cleaned up. And so, to me, I'm going to say first and foremost the books. Get a good, fractional person there outsourced to get you clean and ready to roll.
Okay. All right, Tim, I'm going to start with you on this one. The biggest myth about outsourcing.
Oh, the biggest myth about outsourcing.
Mhm.
Um, that nobody can do it better than you. I'm going to go there. And even if they can't, they'll get you 90% of the way there, and the other 10% won't require nearly as much effort. So,
Mm-hmm.
There you
yeah,
go.
don't be blinded by the fact that you think you're the best at everything.
JT, is there a myth that you see about outsourcing?
Yeah, there is. And I mentioned it earlier, but many of my clients think that it's all going to happen in India or the Philippines and they won't be able to understand who they're talking to. Then they need to train them up for a year and the time zone differences. And it's not like that at all. I think it maybe started that way a decade ago, but now it's so much more streamlined than what people expect.
I think every single thing we've talked about here today, there are experts within the industry that do it. And it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
somebody within the industry for all of this. There are great people outside as well, but there
Yep.
are people inside the industry that do every single thing we've talked about. Josh, biggest myth?
I think I'll just add and clarify on to what Tim said, is the myth of perfection, chasing that perfection piece. It may not be perfect, and that's okay. I'll take 90% or even 80% of the way there.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and and I continue to challenge people on that of okay, let's talk about what perfect is. Let's go through that, and we don't have to get stuck in the chase of perfection.
Progress, not perfection.
Mm.
Yes. Okay. JT, I'm tossing the last one to you first. Your number one piece of advice for contractors who are hesitant to start outsourcing, which we have talked about multiple times, but number one piece of advice.
I think I would say learn where your pain point is. So many of these restoration contractors have numerous pain points, and it gets back to this urgent versus important that I mentioned. They don't know where to start. They don't know where they should start. They don't know where the ROI is going to be. So work with your Viola consultant, work with somebody who can help identify these pain points and prioritize what may or may not happen with outsourcing. Until you learn your pain points, outsourcing to me is going to be a waste of time. I mean, you've really got to understand what you're after and why, and then we can throw some real meaning behind it.
Perfect. Okay, Josh.
I would say, I said it earlier, but I'll double back on it. Start small. Start with one or two. Doesn't have to be, I'm going to take this whole thing and hand it over. Let's start and try it out, see what goes on. Give it a test run. Give some feedback to your outsource conversation. If it's only 75% good and you need 90, there's a way to get that corrected, and it's by talking just like you would to anybody else. So start small and get some feedback.
All right, Tim.
Yeah, I would second what Josh said, but then follow up with define what you want the output to look like. So get clear on what you want to accomplish there, not just the product, but what it's meant to represent with the outsourced contractor that you're using, because usually when you have a little bit more clarity to that conversation, you get a better output. So take that extra time.
Awesome. Okay, Josh, take us home. Give us a quick summary. And if people want to know more, learn more from you, where do they go? How do they reach out? All the things.
Let's do that first since it's on the top of my head. So you can reach me at jbachman@violand.com. That's probably the easiest way. Or go look at our website, which is www.violand.com. You can always find out what we're doing and what we've got cooking over there. And then all the socials, because I'm just ultra social. So it's all out.
Ultra
Yeah, right, exactly. But to wrap things up, Michelle, I think the way I'd wrap it up is that there's not and I'll go back to perfection. There's not a perfect way to outsource. I would challenge any owner that's just starting to feel the limits of themselves, whatever that looks like, to start exploring. Back to JT's point about where those pain points are, what's really taking up my time. I know it's a simple exercise, but I tend to challenge my owners to keep track of what they're doing in a week. And when I start to identify the things that are really bogging them down, then that starts to be my first place that I look for things to go get outsourced. And once you identify those things, then go give it a try. Listen to things like this. Go ask your people in the places that you frequent. Look at the boards that are out there that you can pay attention to. There's lots of resources out there in our industry to bring this home. Let's go find one that's going to take some of that off of you and make things less dependent on you.
Perfect. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much for the great conversation. I appreciate it. For people who are listening, you can find all the Chasing the Vision episodes on the CNR YouTube channel, and you can find them on the CNR website and on Violand's socials, and JT shares parts of it too on his socials, so you can find it all the places. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing y'all on the next episode.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks,
Thank
Josh.
you.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.